Hi, this is Mike Whitehead with American Red Cross National Headquarters, here to talk about Step 3, Planning Assumption Alignment, and the Planning Assumption Alignment Tool. The Shelter and Feeding a Planning Assumption Alignment Tool identifies specific quantitative, scenario-based planning requirements for feeding and sheltering. The tool supports the process outlined in the adjacent graphic. On the Planning Assumption Alignment Tool, we're going to cover Part A, determine the scale of the disaster, and Part B, determine resource requirements. Then we're going to switch over to the Sheltering and Feeding Readiness Assessment Tool. And then when we finish there, we're going to come back to the Planning Assumption Alignment Tool and do Part C, identify available resources, and Part D, identify and fulfill resource shortfalls. Let's start with Part A, determine the scale of the disaster. The scale of the disaster is determined by the high probability, high consequence scenario discussed and agreed to by the participants of the Planning Assumption Alignment meeting. The type of event, the total population of the county, the percentage of the population affected by the scenario, and the resultant percentage of the population requiring sheltering and feeding are entered into the tool. So what we got right here is we go to the type of event. What we're going to say is we've decided it was going to be a flooding event. We decided that population of the county, when we looked at it, it's 500,000. The percentage of the population, and once again, this is something you would discuss with the partners, come up with 20%, and based on that, you would discuss again what is the percentage of the people requiring feeding and sheltering. Here in the example, we're going to use 5%. So we ended up with 125,000 people are in the affected area. Of those, 5%, that's 6,250 people, which for us is the sheltering requirement that we need to try to be able to meet. Once we complete Part A, we go on to Part B, determine resource requirements. The Planning Assumption Alignment Tool focuses on the quantities of facilities, staff, and feeding resources necessary to meet the identified sheltering requirement within 96 hours of the initiation of the scenario event. The 5 resources identified in the tool are the number of shelter facilities, number of shelter spaces, number of shelter supervisors, number of shelter workers, and the shelter meals per day required to feed the population. The next step is for the county, the Red Cross, and the other shelter and feeding partners to identify shelter facilities with the total number of shelter spaces equal to the shelter requirement. In this example, we're going to say it's 20. Once you identify that, then we can look at the number of the resources that are required for each 24-hour period up to 96 hours. The daily workforce and feeding requirements can be adjusted in the Planning Assumption Alignment tool by modifying the numbers in the Sheltering Assumptions tab here. You go to the tab, you'll see that the ratios and the number of supervisors and workers changes over from the 24 to 48 to 72 to 96. What we're doing is we're working towards providing the minimum number of shelter services, and by the time we get to 96 hours, we'll have provided the minimum number of shelter services and we'll be at the minimum staffing levels. The desired outcome of the Planning Assumption Alignment meeting with the EMA and the Red Cross is an agreement on the high probability, high consequence scenario, the sheltering and feeding requirement that resulted from that scenario, and the quantities of shelter resources necessary to meet that scenario requirement. The next step in the planning process will be for each agency to identify the quantities of resources that can provide to meet this requirement in the timeline specified. What we need to do for that is go to the Sheltering and Feeding Readiness Assessment tool. The Sheltering and Feeding Readiness Assessment Tool. Regions are accountable for completing a sheltering and feeding readiness assessment for each pilot area using the Sheltering and Feeding Readiness Assessment Tool. This tool will assist regions in identifying their capacity to provide some or all of required sheltering and feeding services with existing regional resources, as well as address regional gaps with national and local community partner resources. As you can see here, once again, the red highlighted fields indicate where the users should enter information. You're going to have your resources, what the measures are, and what the instructions are for each of the resources, and you fill them out for your 24-hour period and then for the 48-hour period. You're going to fill it out at the end of 24 hours, this is how much stuff I have, and at the end of 48 hours, this is how much stuff I have. We filled in some example information, and you'll see from the example information, the amount of resources you have remains stable over the 72 to 96 hours. So if you cannot meet the requirement, you're going to need additional resources. Those additional resources would come from outside of your jurisdiction, extra jurisdictional resources, as you'll see here on the example on table 2. What we've done is we have averaged out the amount of resources that we anticipate would be available to you from number of shelter supervisors, workers, and shelter feeding that would be available to you in the 72-hour and the 96-hour period. These are resources that would come in to assist you. And in table 3, we'll have a summary of the total of the regional resources in the first 24 and 48 hours and the additional extra jurisdictional resources that would come in the 72 and 96-hour period. And this gives you the total resources by 96 hours that you would have available. Now, in the Sheltering Outputs tab, as you see here, you have your regional shelter capacities. What this is telling you is for the amount of resources you have, this is the number of persons that can be sheltered with that resource. And the number of shelters and the number of persons that the regions can shelter is going to be the minimum, and you'll see right here, the minimum is based on the shelter feeding and disaster mental health are your two shortfalls. And then once again, when you get your additional capacity resources, you'll see what the capacities are for each of these resources. And this will identify what the shortfall is in your resources as to why you cannot you're unable to shelter additional persons. Now, these resources are calculated according to the assumptions in the Shelter Assumptions tab. In the 24 and 48-hour period, they're going to be established according to minimum service standards. By 96 hours, the numbers enable you to meet the minimum staffing standards. This recognizes the fact that when you open the shelter, all of the resources that are going to be required for minimum services and minimum staffing are not going to be available in the immediate periods. Now, once we've completed our work with the Sheltering and Feeding Readiness Assessment Tool, we go back to the Shelter Inputs tab, to Table 3, Total Resources, and this sums up the resources that the American Red Cross can provide for the high consequence, high probability scenario in the 24 and 48 hours by the region, and then this additional resources from the 72 and 96 hours by the extra jurisdictional resources. So this is the answer we want to give to our partners. So we're going to copy that, and we're going to go paste it over here. We're here at Part C, identify available resources on the Sheltering and Feeding Planning Assumption tab. We're going to do a paste special by values. Bingo. Here we got the Red Cross resources available for Red Cross shelters, Red Cross managed shelters. If we have resources that we're providing for partner managed shelters, we'd enter those resources here. And if partners are also engaged in sheltering, we would go to the Partner Resources tab, and for up to 3 partners, we can enter the resources that they would be providing. And that information in turn would be summarized on this tab. We would take our partner resources, the resources we're providing for partner managed shelters, the resources we're providing for our own shelters, and this would identify here at the total resources available, the total resources available for the high probability, high consequence scenario. So then we would go to Part D portion, and I would say for the requirement, what is the identified capacity and what are the shortfalls for per 24-hour period by quantity for each one of the 5 resources that we're tracking.
We have developed an online version of the readiness assessment using a new Microsoft system called Power Apps. This will allow you to fill in your readiness assessment online or through an app on your smartphone. This screenshot shows a picture of the page you will use to input the number. The counties will be preloaded, and you will be able to click on a county and add your assessment numbers. Then click on the check mark in the upper right-hand corner to save. Once the assessment is saved, you will still be able to make changes by clicking on the pencil icon in the upper right-hand corner. The app will have the same inputs as the spreadsheet. Therefore, if you're more comfortable with the spreadsheet, you can use the spreadsheet for the initial assessment and then input into the online version. Once the data is input, the compiled assessment can be viewed on this SharePoint dashboard. The dashboard will allow you to see the roll-up of data at the county, region, or divisional level based on the options you choose. This dashboard is still in development, and we welcome your feedback. The Power Apps and SharePoint dashboard have been developed for both the Readiness Assessment and the Planning Assumptions Alignment tool and can be used in combination with the spreadsheets. The Progress dashboard has also been developed in these platforms and will only be available in the online version. Additional videos are being developed on using the online platforms.